Welcome to the Jordan Harbinger Show. Today, we've got a one-of-a-kind interview with the legendary director Oliver Stone. We cover a hell of a lot of topics. I won't bore you with the table of contents. Here we go. Enjoy. I heard you were a cab driver, and I'm wondering if you learned anything about people doing that job that maybe ended up in your movies. Because I know approximately 18 months after that, you win an Oscar for Midnight Express. So it didn't really develop in a vacuum. And cabbies see some weird stuff.
I would say overall, my impression is that people are good. People are honest. People care. You know, it's not a dark. I don't have I don't get the Joker's viewpoint of humanity. You know, I get a feeling that people behave, and a couple of times, yeah, sure, a few people stiffed me for fares. I remember a few. They'd take me out to some suburb like Queens or somewhere, and they'd stiff you, and at night.
Yeah.
But most of the people were pretty good. It was a hard job because I was writing in the daytime, and the nights were freezing in New York. Walking back home late at night, it was across town, so I couldn't take the bus or a subway unless I went down all the way down. But it was freezing cold at night because New York's not built. Just a curious thing. If you live in Paris or London, the streets are curved and all that, so you don't get all the winds that come off the river. And in New York, they go straight geographically down, like linear. It's a linear progression. Boy, it's fucking cold at 2 a.m. when you're coming back. And I was making $35 a day, roughly, on a good day, $40 sometimes on New Year's Eve, maybe 45. It wasn't big money, but it was good money for that year, 1973 too. And we used to beat the cab company as we could. Yeah, we'd get paid in cash sometimes. We'd run it off the meter, but they caught us. They caught me a couple of times. They caught a lot of us doing that.
Taking the fare and not reporting it, basically?
They'd have undercover cars in traffic. So you never knew if you didn't have the meter up and you had a customer, you were in trouble.
Oh, I didn't even think about you. They just were trying to match the meter. So they would look in your car and see if you had it up?
No, they'd tell from outside. Their
Oh,
eyes
wow.
could see. If you had a customer and you didn't have the flag up, they'd get you. But and I got fined once or twice. But I'm saying if you could beat them for it's small change, but if you could beat them for $5 or $10, and you can make it instead of $35 or $30 a night, you can make $45 or $50 with a cheat. It's great, man. You know what I'm saying? It's that kind of thinking. And of course, you have the whole professional cab drivers like the Peter Boyle character, taxi driver, you have those kind of guys, and you say, oh, I don't want to ever become that, I'm just doing this temporarily, right? But you get worried sometimes.
Yeah, year 10, you're thinking, is this still my temporary job, or is this my forever job? Yeah.
Listen, I thought about that a lot. You read those passages. I always dreaded I love waiters that are good. They really are important to our blood supply. It's important. But I was terrified of becoming a professional waiter, because a lot of those guys did start as actors or opera singers or whatever, and then over time.
Yeah, it can be scary, and I think there's a whole lot of unmet potential, especially today, given how bad our educational system has failed everyone. I mean, people say, like, do I have unmet potential, or is this really my potential? And I thought, it's easy to say everyone thinks they have unmet potential, but it's kind of true. I mean, there's a lot of people that you can tell have raw material. I volunteer a lot inside prisons, and you can tell that some of those guys, if they hadn't been born into absolute squalor and then been essentially devoid of opportunity from day one, they would have been entrepreneurs, business owners, super talented singers, dancers, writers. There's so much talent locked in there.
I used to feel when I was younger, I'm not sure about now, but that there was no choice in life. If you did not have a scientific, technical education, your choices were very limited. I always felt that the soft sciences were not really going to get you jobs. Yeah, you could work your way into something. You could bullshit your way into something, but you could say you have a degree in, social working or something like that. But I always I always said, I really wish I had mathematics. My father was good at mathematics. He was a broker, and he really was smart. And I knew what smart was. I mean, I was surrounded by a lot of smart people when I was young, but I didn't have that ability. So for me, it was writing. Unfortunately, yeah, I didn't have a voice, singing voice. I couldn't play an instrument well. So, right, if it was writing or bust, that was it. And I knew it kind of after the Vietnam thing. And I was writing for those screenplays, all those years of 10, 12 screenplays I must have written before I got Midnight Express.
You had a bit of a tumultuous upbringing. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's in the
well,
book.
yeah, and a lot of this is in the book. We're trying to
Oh.
sort of get people to get really interested and then go out and
Yeah.
buy it.
Yeah, the name of it is Chasing the Light, right? And it came out a month ago or so, and yeah, my parents got a divorce. I had a very good upbringing, very sheltered up in New York City up until about the age of 15. They sent me to boarding school. I think they knew something was coming, but I didn't. I thought they were happily married. I was very very pleased with my family, and they were violently divorced. It was a horrible story, cheating on each other, both sides, and it broke apart my world because I was the only child. So there were only 3 people in the family. When they divorce, and the mother goes back to another place in Europe, father stays in. She was French. It broke up. I was really, in a sense, on my own. I mean, my father was there, but I didn't want to live with him anymore. I was kind of depressed about it all, and I eventually ended up I flunked out of Yale, basically, and I ended up first time in Vietnam as a teacher for 2 terms in high school, and then I went to the Merchant Marine, and then I traveled around Asia. I learned a lot, wrote a book. It was not successful. It was not accepted for publication, but I had my heart in it, and then flunked out a second time and went off to the war, which changed me for good. I mean, I came back from that experience and I was kind of disoriented and numb and alienated. And at the age of 22, late 22, I went back into film school at NYU, which was a vocational education, but I can't say it was an education in liberal sciences, which I got later in life. Making a thing called Untold History of the United States. I really did study hard with professional historians the history of the United States.
Yeah, film school. One of your professors was Martin Scorsese, and what was he, like 26 years old or something like that?
Yeah, he was older than us. He was a star student. He was the celebrity, so to speak. People knew that he was going to make it. Because everybody's goal was to make it in the film business and make films. And he'd made one feature, and he was about to make Mean Streets. He's very energetic, very strong opinion, saw film like a religion, and he talked about it like that with great spunk and humor and excitement. And the classes were fun. He was teaching sight and sound. He was one of maybe 5 to 10 professors that were all good. It was a very sharp place in the 60s. It was a new science, a new art form, so to speak. Nobody really had studied film. It was ridiculous. We all thought it was sort of, we're seeing movies and we're getting a degree. That's kind of, what's wrong with that? Plus, I was getting the GI Bill, which paid for most of the tuition.
It seems like kind of it wasn't even necessarily that you were, let me rephrase this. You weren't even drafted to go to Vietnam, right? You wanted to go. Which is not the usual story that we hear. We hear people saying, "Oh, I got flat feet. I couldn't go to Vietnam, even though I was drafted."
Yeah. Well, most of my generation, the people around me in my schooling, absolutely not. Very few of them went. With that, you have to include Bill Clinton. You have to include George W. Bush, and Donald Trump. All those people were my contemporaries. In fact, Bush was in my class at Yale, and he went on to be a mediocre student, and he got a crazy kind of deferment through his father out of Texas, the Air National Guard, I believe, in Alabama or something, and he screwed that up too. And they covered all that story up, and when Dan Rather actually revealed something about what happened there, he got fired. So that was it was a big cover up in a way. Bush was a very poor student and strange that these guys always want to go to war. The guys like the other guy, the chicken hawks, the Dick Cheneys and the George Bush's, at least you could say in Trump's favor, that he hasn't actively pursued a war, but he's close sometimes. Uh, and Clinton, of course, bombed Yugoslavia and did various things, but didn't seem to think twice about expanding NATO after the Gorbachev-Reagan treaty. That was a big deal for me. Anyway, I went to Vietnam because, as I tried to say in the book, it was partly suicidal. It was a death instinct. It was like I have no place in the world. What I was saying to you earlier about not really being educated or trained, and that the fact that the book that I'd written, which was finally published in 1997 as A Child's Night Dream, I was a book writer, really, and I really wanted it to succeed. But when they rejected it, I felt like I was overreaching myself, and that I was out of line, and that I had to learn the world, the way the world really works. And I wanted to go to the bottom of the barrel. I didn't want to go to school, back to school. I didn't want any special treatment. I wanted to be in the Army. I wanted to be anonymous, and I wanted to be infantry. And I wanted to go to Vietnam because I didn't want to get bored to death in Germany or South Korea. I wanted where the action was. I was a young, active man. And I had a different impression of war from the movies and, of course, from television. American society is very violent. You see it in all the media, even in the 50s. Let's not kid around. There were massacres. They weren't as bloody as they are now, but it was always violence. The threat of violence, that was what made movies and TV go for me. And I went there under that basis. And so I didn't blame anybody, and I didn't bitch about it. I was fatalist. And I ended up serving 15 months, most of them in 3 combat platoons, one in an auxiliary unit in Saigon for 2 months, but the rest in the combat in the field, in the south in the 25th Infantry, in the north in the 1st Cavalry.
It's amazing that you volunteer and go there. And I heard you started to take photographs, which then led you into film. Or were you interested in film before that, and photography was a little detour?
No, that was at the very end of my tour, the last 3 months, when I sort of knew what I was doing as a soldier. I bought a camera at the PX, and a Pentax, as I remember, and I took pictures because it was a beautiful country, amazing country. The rainforests, the sense of perspective, the green was amazing when in the monsoon season. And of course, getting things wet was a real problem. So you can't write anything in the field. You can't keep notes. Generally speaking, it dries up, it gets wet. Everything gets wet as a soldier. So I put a camera in a little in a plastic bag, and I hauled it around. I got some great shots.
I know that when you came back, you ended up with a federal smuggling charge for marijuana. Was it just like everybody smoking grass in Vietnam? Was that just no?
No. It was very much of a red-blue thing. No, the black soldiers with me were. I mean, not all the black soldiers, but certainly I was hanging out with a bunch of heads, they called them back then. And the juicers, the juicers were the guys who drank booze. They were a lot of white Southern guys. I'm typecasting, but that's sort of true, the way it broke down. Now, the black guys were really cool, and they really helped me get through that war because, it wasn't their war. They were cool about it and fun. And the music, they had great music. They had Motown going big back then, and jazz and Mongo, Santa Maria, all that kind of stuff. They were playing in the back in the hooches. They had their own hooch. We had secret hooches where we smoked. And they showed it in Platoon, guys dancing together because there was a femininity that we missed, we didn't have ladies. So it was this wonderful kind of bond that grew up between us. And shit, they didn't owe me anything. And I'd never met black people before in my life. I came from New York City, privileged. So it was quite an introduction to another group of people. And I thought they were really cool, much cooler than the white guys who most tended to be uptight. And it saved my life, and it's because it kept me human. And that's really hard to do in a situation like that, where you're in a frontline unit, and some of these guys are real assholes. I mean, you have no idea what some of those master sergeants in the Army were like. They're lifers, and they'd been around a long time, and they're all looking for make an extra buck. They're all looking for promotion. They're cracking down on you for every bullshit rule they can get you on. So there was a lot of tension, and I got an Article 15, stuff like that.
What's that Article 15 again? I've heard of that.
That's a disciplinary action. It's short of a court-martial.
What'd you get an Article 15 for?
Oh, it was it was a stupid thing. Like my boots were not bloused, or my clothes were. It was. I was coming in. I was in from the field. You see, I was combat vet, and at that time I was posted in Saigon as an auxiliary MP, military police guy, guarding barracks at night, which is a tough job, and they didn't like the way I dressed and the way I looked and my attitude, so they bust you. And I made a deal with him. I said, "Okay, fuck you. I'm not going to take Article 15 because it's going to lead to some time, and they're going to add that time to my time." So I went back to the field. I made a deal and said, "I'll go back to the field, and you drop the charges." That kind of thing. People were making deals all the time. When I was an auxiliary policeman, I happened to be in the MP headquarters, and I saw all the posters for the guys. This is 68 now. In March 68. All the guys that were wanted on the wanted list. You'd be surprised at the amount of black market shit going on, deserters, GIs who had disappeared and were living in Saigon with their girlfriends and making a bundle of cash. It was all kinds of schemes. It was kind of an interesting subculture. There was a black guy that was famous. He'd been out for 2 years roaming around the Saigon docks, and he made a fortune in money. And you see, PX was a big racket in Vietnam. They built a few of them. It was like we built Las Vegas over there. People would go there, and they had all kinds of inside deals, especially the master sergeants. They got busted in a major scandal after the war came out. They would buy cars, televisions. They'd buy anything they could from the PX, and then they'd resell them at a profit to all kinds of Vietnamese collaborators who were racketeers, essentially. Very smart, the Vietnamese. They saw us as a buck, That's what they saw the U.S. as. They were suckers. We were the guys who were bringing a huge amount of money to the country. They didn't give a shit about what was going to happen. They were just trying to score because people were into short-time survival over there, Very smart people. And they were into these rackets. I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars were stolen, millions. I mean, all over the country. It was a big racket, the whole war. Officers would come over there. And they would go there basically to get promoted. They would stay in the rear. They'd be treated like kings, dine on white tablecloths, the best of everything for generals in this. But a lot of them were, into some kind of game. They'd get promotions. Those guys were not cheating. They were not trying to steal money because that was a bigger racket for the sergeants and the lower class people. But if you're an officer, you want to get promotions. You want to get battle. You want to get as many medals as you can. So they'd phony up the reports. As the whole war was just phony body counts, phony actions. Most of the battle actions were completely exaggerated. The post-battle reports, exaggerated. We killed 152 NVA. Bullshit. They killed villagers, and they had a few NVA in there. That's what happened a lot. That's what My Lai was about. My Lai in March 68, 500 plus civilians killed. Not one enemy bullet was fired. I researched that and almost made a movie about it. They wouldn't let me, though. They
Who's the they? Just the...
They, the fucking financial set. It was 2007, 8, 9. That was My Lai. I did a lot of work on that.
The My Lai massacre. We'll link to that Wikipedia in the show notes for people that aren't sure. Is that where that famous photo is from of the little girl walking down the road? Yeah.
Yeah. No. I don't think so. That was a bombing somewhere. Yeah, typical napalm bomb or something like. She got burned.
Yeah, I just remember it's a naked little girl standing in a road, really upset. Yeah. It's a video actually, and I don't know if it's a photo.
I don't know. I thought it was shot by that wonderful Nick Utt, UTT. I think he shot that.
I don't know.
He was a Vietnamese war photographer working for the U.S.
The appetite for drugs, not to belabor the point, I'm just kind of stuck on this. Like the appetite for drugs in the United States, it seems like a lot of people get into it. You said that and the friendship with the African-American soldiers saved your life. I mean, it seems like a lot of people are getting into or have been into drugs since they've been invented, essentially, or discovered, in order to fill like a spiritual vacuum or to sort of fulfill something that maybe you had lost before you even got to Vietnam.
No. I was pretty innocent. I had never really smoked grass. I mean, once or twice. No, I did it for the first time. I did two things for the first time in Vietnam. Started smoking cigarettes, which stayed with me till I was about 33, and started smoking dope, and I loved it. I loved dope. I kept going with the dope. I stopped the tobaccos at 33, but I kept going with the dope. Uh, in fact, uh, I got into. I mean, not then, but they started to get heavier. The whole scene got heavier. After Cool cigarettes,
Yeah,
remember
with the
Cools?
K.
They were
Yeah.
they were they were great. Yeah, with a K. Cools were menthols, and they were like for me the strongest menthol there was. And you do that after a joint, and it would really give you a buzz, a real high. That's why Cool was very popular among the black soldiers.
I think they
Very
still
popular.
are. Like, there's a Dave Chappelle skit where he says, "Why do black people smoke menthol cigarettes?" And the person goes, "I don't know." And he's like, "That's the right answer. I don't know. Why do we do that?" It's like a super popular thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Well, I don't think Salem is the
No,
same
maybe not.
anymore. But anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah, but then after '69, afterward, really, heroin started to come in because heroin was around, and various versions of it, opium, whatever. That started to be more of a problem in '69, '70, '71, and that was when the whole thing started to change. More mutinies, more resistance to the officers. Uh, by '71, the Pentagon issued a report that said very clearly, and you can find that report, that the situation in Vietnam of the troops is demoralized, and it's reaching a level that resembles the French mutinies of World War One, late in the war. That was covered in Paths of Glory. I don't know if you ever
Mm-mm.
saw that movie. The mutinies of World
Wow.
War One. The French soldiers refused to fight sometimes, and that was the same thing was going on in Vietnam. Richard Boyle, my co-writer and a friend from Salvador, he wrote Salvador with me, wrote a whole book called A Mutiny at Firebase. I, I forgot the name. I'm sorry, but Richard Boyle's book is amazing. Or Flower of the Dragon, wasn't that the name of it? I'm sorry. Richard Boyle's book. But anyway, he wrote about a mutiny there. There was a lot of them, much more than you know. Also, what you don't know about Vietnam, and I try to cover it in the book, I said there were three lies in that war. Friendly fire. Friendly fire is, that's soldiers accidentally killing
Hmm.
each other in these complicated war situations. Small firefights, big firefights. The jungle is asymmetrical. You don't know who's firing where, what's coming in, what's going out. I would estimate 15 to 20% of the casualties in Vietnam were from friendly fire. That's from small arms, artillery, planes, bombs. It's very serious. And I believe my first wound, I was wounded twice, came from friendly fire. I write about that in the book. It's important, very important, because the Pentagon always covers that over. They don't want the parents to know their little boy died from friendly fire. Wow, what a
Yeah.
waste, right? But that happens all the time, and it's part of the ridiculousness, the lying. Second thing was the killing of civilians, which I went into. I talked a bit about it with Milai. The third thing was the great big lie of all was that we're winning this war from the beginning. They were saying that we're winning this war. It was all lies. The body counts, the assessments of enemy divisions. The CIA was doing all this. They were leading the war. They were the leading strategists of the strategists. They were making the strategy for the war, and they did a horrible job as usual. CIA's been involved in every war we fight, every losing war. They didn't have as much to do with World War II, which is kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Maybe they should just stay out
Yeah,
of
Mike
it.
goes smoothly. It depends. Yeah, I think that the nature of intelligence agencies and conflicts is something that's quite interesting for me as well.
Disgusting. Well, I'll tell you what the My Lai, I did this research. My Lai, for example, true story. It was investigated by the Army itself, which is amazingly honest. Ray Pierce was a 3-star general. He never thought anything happened to My Lai. He thought it was all bullshit, complaining. And that's the attitude he took into it. He did the investigation, and he wrote up the whole thing. It's available. Now they've redacted some of it, but he went and he busted 28 indictments, 26 or 28 indictments against all the way up the My Lai chain to the general of the division, Coster. He indicted Coster, who was a 3-star general also. Unbelievable story. And of course, they threw out all the 27 of the indictments, and they got Calley, the lieutenant first lieutenant, as the only guy I think ever served time, and he was pardoned quickly by Nixon. Dirty
Yeah.
story. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's all lie. It was a big lie, and don't tell me it was good intentions like Ken Burns wants to say. It's bullshit. It was a lie because that's the basic nature of man, is to cover his ass. And all these people they said, this is a crazy war. So what? I'm going to make money. I'm going to survive. These are the ways people think. But you got back to this whole thing started when you asked me about my drug bust. So just to make an innocuous story, but the irony of the whole thing, I come out of Vietnam and I'm completely zonked, and I'm back in civilian society. I'm free. No one's telling me what to do. I don't know a soul. I wander down the coast from Fort Lewis, Washington to Oregon, California. And I can't handle the States. It's just too much for me right now. So I go over to Mexico carrying my Vietnamese grass, which I'd smuggled back from Vietnam. So I was guilty in that sense that I brought some grass back from Vietnam. Go to Mexico, get bombed, laid, all that stuff. A crazy few days. Come back in a zoned out, and come back at midnight, trying to cross back the border at midnight, carrying the same grass. Of course, I get stupidly busted. Federal smuggling charge, 5 to 20 years.
Oh my God, that's a crazy punishment. How much grass are we talking about? That's ridiculous.
Maybe
unbelievable.
No, of course it is. Yeah, and that was the beginning of the drug war. They didn't call it that then, but Nixon had just been elected, and he was coming into being, and he was going to call the drug war. But that prison was filled with. It was supposed to be for 2,000. It was for 5,000 Hispanics and black people mostly in that jail. I've never seen it. You could see these were all young people. They should have been in the military. None of them gave a shit about that. It was a whole other culture that I saw. It was an America with a K, brutal treatment, and putting these people in jail for nothing. No nonviolent crimes was the beginning of that system. That's what I was facing. They were going to, wrong judge, I would have gotten 5 years, probably first time offense. I was a veteran, but I got out because basically I paid the public assistance lawyer. My father paid him to come and see me, which he hadn't showed up for. He didn't show up for 10 days or 8 days. And finally I got my father on the phone, and he said, where you been? You got out, blah, blah, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I never heard from you. I said, Dad, I'm happy to be home. It's great, but I'm in trouble.
Already.
Oh, shit. What's it? Yeah, exactly. I'm in jail.
Yeah. That's a great phone call to get from your kid after he gets back from Vietnam, right?
I imagine his face.
My God. Did you ever experiment with psychedelics?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Starting over there.
Where did you get it over there? Was it just acid?
Listen, people are smart everywhere in the world. You know that. I mean, there's always some guys who got something. I actually did it in Australia on R&R. I did it. R&R, Australia was a big LSD place back then. There was a guru, like a Tim Leary type, who was leading the Sydney Brigade, and it was wild. And there was all kinds of stuff happening. It's beyond the ken. People don't know those stories, but they're very interesting. Like the story I tell you about being an MP and all the deserters in Saigon. There was a whole underground culture, as there is in every war. Underground culture. People living differently. Nobody conforms all the time to the demands of the army. They mock it. They go outside it. And that's the American way. Do you remember The Dirty Dozen? It's more like that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that movie when I was little.
Guys were schemers.
Yeah.
Guys were schemers who were always doing things, trying to figure out angles. There's always a schemer in the platoon.
I heard you once put LSD in your dad's drink at a party. That's a bold move, man.
Yeah, why not? Because he needed it.
What do you mean?
His attitude on the war was fucked. He was like, he was a Republican. He was solid. He'd been in World War II. He was a lieutenant colonel. He thought the war was a good thing at the beginning, and then he realized it was not what it cracked out to be. But so I was really pissed at him. We had a lot of fights about everything. And at one point, I just was fed up, and I put a heavy dose of orange sunshine into his scotch. He loved to drink scotch at night, scotch on the rocks. We were playing chess, and I put it in. Man, I really dumped it in, and he got so fucking high. I loved it. It was great to watch. He never knew it was me because we moved on to a dinner party, and he took me to, and there was other people at the table, so he never knew what hit him. He did know something had been given to him, but he never blamed me. Or years later, 2 years later, he said, he kind of had the feeling, and he enjoyed the trip. In the end of the trip, it was a sex trip for him. He enjoyed it because it broke through certain barriers he had. For example, he had fantasies about black women. He told me all about it. It was.
He told you
really,
about it during the trip.
No, later.
Oh, okay. I was like, that's a little more than you bargained for if your dad's tripping out. And he's like, let me sit you down and tell you about.
Well, I wanted to change his thinking, but maybe he was going in that direction. Like me, I'd gone to Vietnam. I was talking like a black man at that point. I was smoking cools, Hey, man, I was into my marijuana head.
That's really funny. I mean, does he? I can imagine it couldn't have been that hard to figure out. You're playing chess with one person and you suddenly start tripping on acid. You go to a dinner party, but
no, not right away. You don't
sure.
go up right away. It takes you sometimes.
But that's the giveaway, right? I've been at this dinner party for an hour, and now I'm super tripping.
Yeah.
Where was I an hour ago? Playing chess with my son, and I having a glass of whiskey.
I'm not sure he made that connection because he didn't know the rules of LSD.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
Also, he'd been drinking a bit that day too. It was a Saturday. He was a tough guy, and there's some funny incidents. He started eating Oreo cookies, and the party broke up into a dance, and he was watching the dance from hanging onto a tree. And that's where the black girl fantasy started. They were dancing through drums out of the Congo, he was saying.
Yeah, he was definitely. That was a good dose of acid. If he saw people dancing out of through the jungle or something like that. Yeah. I heard you kicked your cocaine habit while writing Scarface, but that seems like the opposite time to kick a cocaine habit. I think a lot of people started their cocaine habit after watching Scarface.
Well, I guess I do things backwards. I don't know what it is. No, cocaine, it was not a good drug for me, a bad drug. I started in Hollywood in the 70s. It started to get very hot. A lot of the younger people were doing it, creative people. And I got sucked in, and basically after Midnight Express was a big hit, and I sort of got into the bubble champagne. I was working, but I was certainly enjoying my life, and I was trying to feel it out. I was meeting famous people, I was wanted, being offered deals, screenplays. It was a fantasy. And beautiful girls in Hollywood, God, you have everything you want. I mean, money, drugs, girls, it's everything evil.
Yeah. Everything that can corrupt you. Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. I really did. And I enjoyed the shit out of it. But I did the drug out of a party instinct, and it was fun. And that's what I thought, energy thing. It was a good energy thing. I didn't take it any more seriously than that. And then after The Hand, which I wrote and directed, which is an interesting horror film. I think you should go back and see it with Michael Caine. But it didn't work out for me commercially, and I was shamed. I was shamed by the so-called official establishment. Like I made a horror film about a severed hand, and I allowed myself to be shamed, which I regret. I regret doing because it is a better film than what they made it out to be. But the point was, my wife and I started to, my second wife and I started to do cocaine, but I got addicted, and the addiction is terrible. When you're not in control, you don't have control over your whole system anymore, and that's the end of your enjoyment as well. So it really turned into a nightmare for, I'd say, almost a year, and my writing deteriorated. I could tell. I was still sentient enough to tell that my brain cells seemed to be affected. I felt that, and also I had some objective. A producer I was working with told me it wasn't as good a screenplay. I was writing a screenplay for him. It wasn't as good as he thought it should be, blah, blah, blah. And of course I got bailed out in the sense I was surrounded. My friends were doing it. That's the problem with cocaine or any drug like that. You get surrounded by a milieu, and it's hard to get out of it. But salvation came in the sense that I got a call to go down to Miami from a producer who had worked with me before, Marty Bregman, and to work on the research and to write the screenplay for Al Pacino and Scarface. And of course, it was about drugs, so it was no problem for me because I did the research.
I've been researching this exact drug for a really long time. I know a lot about it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I didn't
obviously
about it, but I actually took a trip to South America before that and hung out with some heavies down in really, they had great coke down there. I mean, like, talking about, I forgot how strong it was. It was pure. It was so pure that I would fall asleep on it, that kind of pure. Sometimes the pure stuff really knocks you out.
Did not know that. Didn't see that coming.
But,
yeah.
Yeah, I think you can research that one.
Yeah, I'll have to Google it.
Anyway, I'm saying I reached a place, I really learned a lot. And I hung out, and I got into the criminal side of it, which was important. And snorting it with them was part of that. And once I had all the facts, I said, I got to get out of here. I can't write this in Miami. So I thought about going to France, which is where my mother was living, as well as my grandmother. And it was a wonderful kind of place for me because it was winter there, and the people were not into coke at all. And I had no friends there who did it, and the food was great. So it was a great chance to break the habit, and I did with my wife. And although I did it after that, I never really was addicted again, ever, which means you need it and you can't say no. I can easily say no and walk away. So I don't claim to be an angel or anything, but
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's what makes the stories interesting, right? And it's also what makes like looking at someone's background like yours interesting is because we go, oh, okay, this isn't like a guy writing in a vacuum. This is somebody who has maybe not a giant Scarface pile of cocaine, but has certainly probably seen something like that at some point, right? The giant plate.
I saw a lot of people get hurt. Yeah, I saw a lot of people get hurt. And the saddest thing was to see some beautiful actresses, beautiful women who came to Hollywood with great looks. You'd fall apart on cocaine. Their looks would fall off. And that was sad to see.
We hear a lot about China censoring movies these days, in Hollywood censoring movies these days, actually, for either the U.S. or for China. What do you think of that? As a creator, what do you think of that? Is that just part of the game that you've got to appease the Chinese censors, the U.S. Financiers, or what?
Well, in a sense, it's always that, isn't it? You're always a game. What is currently fashionable? It's all censorship in a way. I was running into problems back in '78. I mean, at the Golden Globes, I was blasting they were throwing all these cop shows on the air. All the bad guys were colored people, or, they were going to jail, and the good guys were, triumphant in their virtue signaling or whatever they call it, and I just was sick of it back then. And I got into trouble making a speech at the Golden Globes when I won an award for Midnight Express, blasting that kind of culture. And they threw me off the stage because I was incoherent when I made the speech, because I was drunk and coked out. But the point is, there's always fashion. You're always fighting against fashion. I always have my life. I mean, you always have to. I've always gone my way and tried to do things with integrity and authenticity, and it has nothing to do with what's in the air right now. Whether it's this fashion, that fashion, you got to have. There's always rules, and you have to figure out a way to survive that. I don't remember it being any different. The Chinese are ridiculous. They have no. I've been there several times, and I worked with Chinese. You're not allowed to even mention Mao. Mao. Jesus Christ! Their own history, they deny them. You can't even. I had a script about the Cultural Revolution, a beautiful script. It was a book, actually. I optioned it. Couldn't make it in China, and even in the 2000 period when they were a little more liberal. Couldn't make it because they didn't want to know. They want to keep that away from their citizens. The Cultural Revolution is what all these my generation went through in the 60s in China. Couldn't tell a story about it. Bertolucci managed a little bit of it very effectively in Last Emperor, which I love, but it's just not allowed. And then it got worse as the 2010s came around. So I'll tell you a story, quick story. I was hired to do an Olympic Games commercial back in whatever it was. They had the Olympic Games in China, 2008, 12?
Yeah. Now I can't remember, but yeah, I want to say 2008.
Anyway, I was working a commercial, and I wanted, for my commercial idea, I wanted to do 200 Chinese faces from the streets. And that's all. It was about the Chinese face and my interpretation of it. So one day, I picked out the 200 people from the streets. I'd gone out and done all that. And one day, the censors showed up and they asked me, what I planned. And I showed them the pictures of the people that I was going to shoot. I was open about it. And they got upset because they looked at it and they said, well, we have to talk about this and think about it. They came back and they said like 80% of them were canceled because they didn't have the right Chinese face. So I said, fuck you. And I gave up. I walked away. But that's typical of the censorship that filmmakers have to go through there. And that's their custom. That's the way they are. This is a very tough society. They don't fuck around. I had a couple of other problems which came up later. It's not worth going into now, but it's a tough society. That's all I can say. And anybody can get a good film made out of it. Bravo.
Do you think you could make a movie like Platoon now? Do you think an American studio would touch a movie like that these days?
No, not with friendly fire and killing civilians. And no, it's impossible now. Did you read this book, 2017? Matthew Alford, and he's a co-writer. It's called National Security Cinema. Read it. He goes into detail on some 800 movies the Pentagon has worked on. Goes into detail on it, and he goes into detail on the CIA working in Hollywood. It's you have no idea the influence, how deep they've gotten. Partly because, well, the military thing is money. They have big money. They can lend you enormous amount. They can give you soldiers, they can give you equipment. It saves a lot of money. It can be up to $50 million they can give you in some of these pictures.
Wow.
And that's important for producers. I mean, you don't have any idea of the films that were affected by this. The films I made, as well as some other people, not very many, were all outside the Pentagon. They condemned my film. They blasted it. They would never cooperate with it. Same thing with Born on the 4th of July. Same thing with Heaven and Earth. Salvador, never, in no way, because no, these films couldn't be made. You understand? This is a very rigid society, as bad in its way as China. Because after 2001, when everybody was suddenly singing the patriotic song, how, we've got to fight back and revenge, we're going to take on the world, all that crap, the George Bush bullshit, that was over. Then that's when they passed the Patriot Act, and everybody got on his tin soap opera, the horn, and started announcing was wearing American flags everywhere. Presidents used to wear American flags on their you're too young to remember. It would be ridiculous. It'd be a joke to wear an American flag pin. No world leader wears that. Only in this country where you got a lot of tin horn patriotism.
I never heard that term, tin horn patriotism. I guess it makes sense though, right? Like just sort of lip service. Is that what that means?
Yes, lip service. People don't go. They won't go. They're the George W. Bushes. Talk big and then they fuck up their National Guard commitment completely. They lie and they cheat and they steal. That goes on a lot. This is what I'm talking about. This is what war is. Don't you think it's going on in Iraq, Afghanistan right now? Don't you think a lot of people are making money? A lot of people are cheating. It's the standard. It's not the the soldiers might be really good. The unit might be really good, but what are they achieving? They're going out and killing a few civilians, or they're fighting some kind of monster in their head, but they rarely see the enemy. They don't even know who the enemy is half the time.
I heard you set the explosives yourself on Platoon. I don't think they'd let you do that anymore either.
No, that was a special case. It was a very low budget film. We were in the Philippines. Nobody cared. It was a B film, considered a B film. We came out of nowhere. We were a $6 million film. They used to make the exploitation films in the Philippines. It wasn't not much expected. I had no choice. We had very limited staff. We had a good special effects crew from England, but very they were overstaffed. They were understaffed rather. They couldn't keep up with the amount of explosions we had to do in this movie. So I blew them because I knew where the actors were going to go.
That sounds incredibly dangerous and incredibly fun.
Well, the helicopters were more dangerous. That was and I write about that in the book. Helicopter work is very, very, you're flying you got to cut, for the camera angle, you got to get close to the blades. You got to get in the air. You got the currents. You're overweight on the helicopter. And we almost went down. I described that incident. And actually, a year later, a Chuck Norris film, that's one of those same choppers went down because the maintenance is poor. Not because they're a good army, but they just don't have money, and to maintain them at the level they need to be made. And one of those choppers went down, and 9 or 10 people were killed in that film unit. It was very scary. The worst since I'd been in Vietnam. I did more than 25 helicopter missions in terms of you landing in enemy territory. But here, this was very dangerous, what we did.
Martin Sheen and Michael Douglas said that you were essentially willing to compromise your relationships with actors in order to make the best film. And I kind of compare that to interviews here on the show. You know, I see a lot of interviewers and journalists, they ask softball questions. They basically try to get their show guests to sort of be like entertaining or be friends instead of having a real conversation. And in my mind, it's about putting the audience first. And I wonder if that's how you think of your films as well. Is it about the audience, or is it about the final result being something that you're satisfied with personally?
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, there's no question. You have to work with your actor, and and there's always give and take, compromise. I'm not hardline about anything, as you can see my attitude. I have a sense of humor about it, but I'm characterized often as hardline. No, you have to get somewhere, and and it's a director's job to sort of pace it, to know what's working and what's not working. And if it's not working, you got to solve it. You have no choice. You're on the spot. So how do you solve it? You don't take the hard approach. You take the let's talk approach. You try to reason this out. Try to get the actor to where he needs to go. Sometimes you got to put a little stick in there to give him a little, because an actor can relax. He's in his comfort zone. Michael Douglas had been a television star, and I guess you get used to a certain level. And I think he himself admitted that he wasn't pushing himself that script, the gecko part was extremely complex with long speeches, and we put dialogue in there that was very juicy, but it was long, and you had to learn your lines before you got to the set. You had to know them like inside your soul, and he wasn't there right away. So, yeah, I did insist on that.
So this is Wall Street. This is him being Gordon Gekko on Wall Street. Yeah.
On Martin Sheen, he was very good. I don't remember any issues with Martin. I enjoyed working with him very much, as I did with Michael. Eventually.
Yeah, I think they were giving you a compliment, or maybe they were thinking about the way that you worked with other actors. I don't think it was meant as a sort of a dig.
Well, sometimes it's misunderstood, no question, and sometimes you get killed in the press, unfairly, because sometimes an actor will go public with his complaints. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's right, because you don't snitch on each other. It's like going to school,
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. It seems like your goal is to get the thing done. And it's from your book, it seems like getting a movie done is actually a lot harder than most people think.
Yeah. I'm amazed at that. People always say, oh, I didn't realize it was so hard, but I respect movies, and I really admire them if they're well made, and I understand the difficulty, and I don't think people who see them don't understand. They think it's easier than it is, and perhaps I think that's common. And it's not up to the audience to have to go through the pain we go through, but sometimes the critics who interpret the film, should know better when they tear films apart.
Most of your movies, or many, I should say, are about like gangsters, war. Do you think we have more to learn from the dark side of human nature than maybe we have to learn from everyday people?
I think we can learn a lot from the dark side, but I think it's important too to show the good side where it exists and where the hope can be. The only film I ever made that was completely black, or two films I made that were completely black and without hope, were, I think, Talk Radio, which showed the darkest side of a talk show host, and who got killed based on the 80s, and a character Barry Ellenberg. And another one was U-Turn, which was a film noir, a real film noir where everybody dies in the end.
You interviewed Vladimir Putin, who's probably in my top 5.
Oh, that too. Okay.
Yeah. Top 5 wish list.
Wait, what are the top 5 Oliver Stone subjects? Let's see.
I mean, you took a lot of flack for that because, people said you didn't push back on any of his assertions. I mean, I guess I understand not pushing back too hard against somebody who's known as known as a brutal dictator, and you're in his house or in his office surrounded by Russian Secret Service. I assume it took you years to set something like that up.
No,
No?
no, no. I don't know. You see, first of all, a have you seen the interviews?
I
That's
have.
important because a lot of people.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Have you seen all 4 hours?
I think I have the first three. I don't know if I have all four.
Okay, well, you should see the fourth one because that one goes to the Donald Trump election and into the, and I think it's the most penetrating interview I've ever seen. With
I think
Putin.
so, yeah. Well, there aren't many, right?
You just don't see that. Well, no, because every American or English interview I've seen, they dub him first of all. You know,
Yeah, of course.
They put a voice who sounds like a gangster or a thug over the guy who's talking to you, and blah blah blah, and he sounds like mean
Right.
and nasty. It's not Putin at all. Putin is, is his technocrat. Is that's what he was, and he very very logical and in what he said. Everything he said, I asked him some provocative questions. He answered it. I even asked him about when he was going to give up power because the presidential election was coming up. And I pushed him on that, and he got upset. I don't know why people, when I see Megyn Kelly, you laugh. I mean, it's so superficial because it's framed as an attack to please the American audiences. Like, why did you do this? Why did you beat your wife? Why? That's the way the Americans talk to him. It's a Mike Wallace approach. Gets nowhere because it's only geared for American audiences to hear that the newsman has got a point to make. You don't hear about the guy he's interviewing. It's always like that. And that's what sucks about American media. It stinks. A French interview would be much more balanced in that regard. Most interviews, even English sometimes, all of the English are a little crazy about the Russians, but so that's a very important. I think you have to look at them. I think historically they're important. It's an important piece for historians, archivists. Anyone who looks at those 4 hours is going to understand the Russian position from 1999 to now when Putin was in office. It's clear what he's thinking. And America has a lot to answer for that period. A lot. And I'm talking not as a pro-Russia guy or anything like that. I'm talking about as a fair, balanced person. Think about what we did in that period. This is, again, part of my life's work is what are we doing? What are we doing about our country? I've always pointed to that effect, whether it's Vietnam, Salvador, or any of our presidencies or this issue, which is very dangerous, by the way, very dangerous because we keep assuming the Russians are going to put up with being insulted and trashed in our media. And we do it so easily and reflexively. And when you say a brutal dictator, what a brutal dictator to me is a guy who puts people in dungeons and tortures them and kills them. I don't see that. I don't see that. It's not that way in Russia at all. They still have the internet's free. People can do what they want on the internet. It's just not that way you think it is. The opposition to him, it's legitimate. But it's small. People do like him. And he's been in office for what? He's had, they don't have the American presidency system. They don't have a democracy like we have. But look at our democracy. It's not exactly working well. It's kind of leaking.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I do wonder, though, like you've said something like, I hope to one day see an America where we live in a true democracy. Do you hope that Russia one day wakes up and there's a true democracy, or you think a different standard applies?
Not the point. I don't think it's the point because they never had it. They're working on it. They what did they have? They had the Tsar, then they had this communist system up until 1989, and then it was really in '89 when they started to have. And what happened? The first 10 years were a disaster with Yeltsin. A disaster. He was a U.S. puppet. He was our guy, and we're going to free up everything, privatize. We're going to, and everybody, all the crooks stole everything they could. The Khodorovskys, the guy who, what's his name, the Brower,
Bill Browder.
Yeah, one of the worst gangsters of all. He stole everything he could. I mean, everybody looted Russia. So by '99, it was falling apart, and people hated this Yeltsin regime. It was the United States propped up Yeltsin in '96, made him. He was not going to win that election. That was their democracy, American democracy. It was a cheat. We put him in office. We stuffed him, put money into him, created a balloon candidate, and somehow he got fucking reelected. Who knows? As much as fraudulent as it was. So when Putin came on, he picked up the pieces, and he really did. And you have to study his record again. Take the
Oh, I
time.
have. I've
Don't
read
make
every book on
fast
Putin
judgment.
that's out there.
Oh, well, every book written by a Western hack is gonna repeat the same charges that he kills people and
Many of the
all
books
that.
I've read are written by Russians and translated into English. So,
Yeah, a lot of the Russians who appeal to the West can be very, very, how do you say, worse than the Americans in terms of criticism. But look, whatever you read, I'm not going to. There's a lot of issues, and Stephen Cohn can answer every one of them for you. But I don't think you have time here to do that. The point is, the point is that he has done a remarkable job, and that's what he's lauded for in Russia, as well as probably 2/3 of the world admires him. I hate to tell you, but I've been everywhere in the Middle East and Asia. People say he's good for Russia. So a democracy, yeah, they have a democracy. If he was unpopular like Cesarescu or something in Romania, he would be out by now. Yeah, you don't stay in office if you fuck up. That's the Russian way, and it doesn't. You can last maybe, but it's not in his interest. He wants to serve, and if he feels that he's not serving, we'll see what happens. If he doesn't serve their interest, he'd be out. That's the way it works. It's a pressure system. There's a lot of people around him who want the job. He's got pressure from inside as well as outside. So it's not an easy job to stay there. But I don't think he's a brutal dictator, frankly, and unless they tell me he poisons people.
well,
Every one of those.
yeah, that's what they're saying now. Of course, I mean Novichok. There's been multiple people who've been poisoned by that.
Yeah.
Do you just think he has? That's not him, or
No, no. Listen, I think these are dirty stories, and each one deserves its own history. You got to trace each one, going back to the poisonings in London back then in 2000. Litvinov was his name? Yeah, it
Skripal.
doesn't hold water.
Skripal. Litvinenko is who you're thinking of. Yeah.
No, that's Skripal. Yeah. Now, none of those hold water. When you examine, when you listen to the evidence, like Sherlock Holmes, it just doesn't hold. It makes sense that MI5 or MI6, the British Secret Service, is much more involved in dirty hands than Russia. For Russia, also the motive is not there. Why would you do this at a time when, hey, you're just about to make a better deal for a peace? Whenever there's a chance to make a better deal with Russia, that's when something like that happens. Whether it's coming out of Afghanistan and they come up with a bounty story, which is bullshit, which is proven to be bullshit, like everything else. It's just all these stories come out at the worst possible time, and all those poisonings too. Navalny, same kind of shit. It seems to me that it's. I mean, I don't want to get into all the specifics with you, but everything I know just leads not to that. What would be their motive in doing it? He's been around for years. He's a social media presence. He doesn't have political power. Why? Why would you make that kind of mess unless you want to screw up the Russian thing and say, look, we don't. This is an election. We want to blame it on Trump. We want everything to go against Trump. We want to get him out of office. And I understand that drive. So we cannot let the Russians off the hook any more than we can let the coronavirus go away. We have to keep the country locked down and scared because it's better for our chances to get elected. I understand that. It's political, but it's very dangerous to play that game, especially with another country as an enemy.
I think you've expressed points like this before with intelligence agencies and having an initial distrust of, or I should say implicit distrust of intelligence agencies. Is it mostly the Western intelligence agencies that you distrust, or is it intelligence agencies and covert ops in general that you distrust?
It's a tricky question, but I'm not an expert on Russian intelligence agencies, although what I've told you about Vietnam alone, which should make you suspect. Why is this? Why are the liberals all of a sudden cottoning up to the CIA? That is stunning to most people who think for themselves. Why, when the CIA has been so badly involved throughout the 70 years that I've been alive, for creating a Cold War, making it worse than it is, Vietnam, and then we have, of course, the CIA missed completely the fact that Russia was changing under Gorbachev, right? They had no knowledge that the Russian system was changing. That's a known fact. The Iraq War, this first one too, the second one, Afghanistan, Libya,
Syria.
Syria. Oh, Syria. That's another mess. When you go into any of these wars, you'll find that we've been lied to. The public has been lied to, and by them, and they've created false narratives. constantly and false criteria. And on that basis, we've gone to war. This is what's crazy. Who's to blame? Not Russia to blame, or is it us? If we ask these questions, hardball questions, if our media was honest and asked these questions, we wouldn't have been in these wars. And a lot of people would be alive today. We'd be a far healthier country. We'd have partnerships with China. We'd have partnerships with Russia. We'd be dealing with a climate crisis, which is really fucking important, instead of dividing ourselves, being distracted, not paying any attention to the biggest problem of all. This is what's so depressing about my era, and depressing to be alive. I wish it were, and it could all be dealt with rationally, but they never do this. The media in this country has been co-opted by the state. I don't know what it is, but it's just impossible to be logical here.
Well, on that note, I know that you have. I want to be conscious of your time. I know, we've had a little bit of issues. I would love to hear your counterpoints your ideas and everything on Putin another time. Maybe when I come to Los Angeles, if you ever have a free moment to talk about this kind of thing. Yeah, I am interested in that.
Well, if you want to talk off the record.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, off the record, not on a Zoom call. But I wonder, in closing, I got to close it with something other than that, right? Is there anything that you haven't been able to make, maybe because you're running into roadblocks like you did with Snowden or other types of hurdles like you would imagine you would with a movie like Platoon? Is there anything you haven't been able to do? You mentioned My Lai earlier.
That was a huge effort. We were 2-3 weeks from shooting. It fell apart. No, that's heartbreaking. You have no idea. So many things. There was the MLK, Martin Luther King story. I wrote too candid a version of it. I was involved in that for twice, and I was dealing with what I knew as the facts. But it's not able to be done. We're a politically correct country. Those two come to mind. But certainly, I've had many stalls. The Snowden affair was ugly in the sense that not one person, this is an American hero, legitimate hero, who really did. He was thinking about our country. He's a patriot in the first order. A bit of a Boy Scout, yes, but he's a patriot of a first order. And what he did is shocked us into a realization that few people have still been able to realize, that we're listening in on everything. It's a new world. It's uglier than we thought. And cyber warfare, and he's told us, we've figured out a lot more about cyber warfare. Of course, in our narrative, everyone's fighting against us. The Chinese are hacking us. The Russians are hacking us. It goes on and on. We never talk about what we're doing. It's part of the problem. So Snowden was impossible to get done. No money from America. Got it from France, got it from Germany. Then we got back at the very end, we got a small amount from an American small company that distributed it very poorly in this country. No studio would touch it. Now that's something. Here's an American hero, and they're scared of him. Why? What's going on? Does the NSA call up somebody in Hollywood and say, don't touch this? Well, it's something like that could happen. I know that it happened in one case at one of the studios, because the guy who was running the studio was wired into the intelligence agencies. That's just the nature of things. He's married to somebody who's, the boards are all interlocking. It's very hard to get things made. At MGM, when I tried to do Platoon, there was Henry Kissinger and Alexander Haig on the board of MGM. I'm not hiding any of this. This is known. I'll never prove that they stopped the film, but they did kill it. It was a very sweetheart deal for them, easy deal, but they killed it. They wouldn't touch it because it was political. I can't prove it, but I know it. Dino De Laurentiis also knew it. Listen, this is a tough game, and they play for keeps, and they've gotten very tough now for people like me. So there's other things I wouldn't even consider going to try to make. In other words, they turn you off by chilling, a chilling effect, Why should I try to make that?
Right. What would you make if you had no chilling effect whatsoever?
I guess I'm disillusioned enough to say to you that I wouldn't even know anymore because it's what I've said to you at this interview is important. If you think about it, listen to it again, you'll see why suffocation is in order here. It's a suffocation.
Oliver, thank you very much. This is really an interesting interview. I went off the rails early on, kind of on purpose, and I'm glad that I did because I think it was a lot of fun.
What's off the rails mean to you?
Just like asking about personal stuff early and going into the drug thing, which I thought maybe I would avoid, but then I was like, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Why not? And it was fun. It was an interesting.
Well, I gave you thorough answers.
Yeah.
You know, I'm too old to concern myself. I mean, I'm alive. I'm well. You can see I'm not destroyed by drugs, which is what the propaganda would tell you. I'm not a nutcase. You know, long live marijuana. It got me through that war.
Thank you very much.
Good luck, Jordan.
Hope you all enjoyed that. You can find a lot more episodes of The Jordan Harbinger Show in the podcast feed. That's available in iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. Subscribe to the podcast feed, and there are a lot more episodes beyond what we put right here on YouTube. Now click here for an interview with billionaire investor Ray Dalio, and here for an interview with legendary actor Danny Trejo. And of course, click here to subscribe to the channel.